In October of 1347, 12 ships came into the harbour at Messina on the island of Sicily. They were Genoese trading galleys returning from the east. But something was wrong. When the harbour men climbed aboard, they found the crews collapsed at their oars. Most were already dead. The few sailors still breathing were burning with fever, and their bodies were covered in strange black swellings. The people of Messina ordered the ships out of the harbour at once, but it was already too late. Whatever those ships carried was already ashore. And in the next 4 years, it would kill somewhere between a third and a half of everyone in Europe. This is the story of the Black Death, and to understand it, we have to go back to a war on the far edge of the known world. On the shore of the Black Sea stood a city called Caffa, today Feodosia in Crimea. Caffa was a Genoese trading colony, a rich gateway where the goods of Asia met the merchants of Europe. But in 1346, the city was under siege. A Mongol army of the Golden Horde had surrounded its walls. The siege had dragged on for months. And then something began to move through the Mongol camp. A sickness no one recognized. It swept through the soldiers faster than any blade, and the army began to die where it stood. According to one Italian account written soon afterward, the dying Mongols did something terrible. They are said to have loaded their own plague dead onto their catapults and hurled the corpses over the walls of Caffa. Historians today doubt the disease truly spread this way. The man who wrote it down was never even there. But the people inside Caffa were doomed all the same, because the real carrier was already among them, riding in the grain stores and the ship's holds, in the fleas that lived on the black rats of the trade routes. As the siege collapsed, the Genoese merchants did the only thing they could. They fled by sea toward home. Their ships carried silk and spice and the rats, and as they sailed west, the dying began on board. They stopped at Constantinople. They stopped at the ports of the Aegean, and everywhere they touched, the sickness stepped ashore with them. By October 1347, the fleet reached Messina, and from that Sicilian harbour, the Black Death entered Europe. At first, the people of Messina did not understand what was happening to them. The sickness began with a fever and a headache. Then came the swellings, hard lumps in the neck, the armpits, the groin, some as large as an apple. They called these swellings buboes. It is where the word bubonic comes from. And once they appeared, most people were dead within days. There was no treatment. There was no understanding. Physicians blamed bad air, the alignment of the planets, the wrath of God. From Sicily, the plague leapt to the mainland, to Genoa, to Pisa, to Venice. The great trading cities became the perfect doorways. By the spring of 1348, it had reached Florence, and there, a writer named Boccaccio watched his city come apart. He wrote that the sick were abandoned. That brother left brother, and parents would not tend their own children. So many died so quickly that the rituals of death simply collapsed. There were not enough priests to bless the dead, not enough gravediggers to bury them. In town after town, the dead were carried out and laid in great pits, dug deep and filled in layers. A chronicler in the city of Tournai watched coffins carried through the streets day and night until the city ran out of room to bury them. The plague did not stop at the Alps. It climbed the rivers and the roads into France, into the heart of the continent. It reached Paris. It reached the papal city of Avignon, where the Pope sat surrounded by burning fires day and night, trying to keep the bad air away. By 1349, it had crossed the sea to England, to a country with no idea what was coming. It tore through London. It emptied villages so completely that some were never lived in again. Whole families died within a single week, in the same house, in the same bed. No one understood why it spread. They could not see the fleas or the bacteria that carried it. We now know the killer was a bacterium, Yersinia pestis, carried by fleas, which traveled on the rats that lived alongside people everywhere. In a world without sewers, without clean streets, where rats and people lived side by side, the disease found a perfect road. And as the bodies piled up, the minds of the living began to break. Some believed the plague was God's punishment, and that only suffering could turn his anger away. Across Europe, processions of penitents appeared, the flagellants. They marched from town to town, whipping their own backs bloody as they walked. They believed their pain might buy mercy for everyone. The church would later condemn them, but in those years, terrified crowds followed them like saints. And then fear turned to blame. People searched for someone to accuse, and they found their neighbors. A horrifying rumor spread that the Jewish communities of Europe had poisoned the wells. It was a lie. But across the continent, that lie became a massacre. Entire communities were driven out or destroyed for a crime that never happened, one of the darkest chapters of an already unimaginable time. By 1351, after 4 years, the Great Wave finally began to fade, and Europe looked around at what was left. The numbers are almost impossible to hold in your mind. Between a third and a half of all the people in Europe were gone. Perhaps 25 million people in Europe alone. Tens of millions more across Asia and the Middle East. It may be the deadliest pandemic in human history. And the world that survived was not the same world that the plague had entered. Before the plague, there were too many people and too little land. Peasants were bound to their lords, and their labor was worth almost nothing. Afterward, the survivors found that the living had become precious. There were fields to work, and almost no one left to work them. For the first time, ordinary workers could demand wages and walk away if they were refused. The old chains of feudalism had begun to loosen. Lords tried to force the old ways back, with laws and punishments, but the world had changed, and it would not change back. Faith itself was shaken. A church that had promised protection had been just as helpless as everyone else, and the Black Death never truly left. It returned again and again, for centuries, wave after wave, generation after generation. It would take 600 years before scientists finally identified the tiny bacterium that had brought a continent to its knees. But the people who lived through it had none of that knowledge. They only knew that their world had ended, and somehow they had to begin again. It had begun with 12 ships, drifting into a harbour with the dead still at the oars. No one aboard knew what they carried, and by the time anyone understood, half of Europe was already in the ground. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. These videos take real work to research and bring to life. If you'd like to see more, consider subscribing. This has been Cataclysm History, and I'll see you in the next one.